I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when the photo appeared on my timeline like a slap across the face. My sister Vanessa stood radiant in flowing white silk, her arms wrapped around Marcus' chin, her fiancé, against the backdrop of Monterey Bay's golden cliffs. The caption read, "3 days until I marry my soulmate. Can't wait to start forever with this incredible man. #Monterey wedding #love wins #Vanessa and Marcus." Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The comments flooded in like confetti, hearts, congratulations, excited relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Our cousin Riley wrote, "Most beautiful bride ever." Our old neighbor Mrs. Patterson commented, "So happy for you both." Even our estranged Aunt Diana had left 3 heart emojis. Everyone celebrating, everyone included in this perfect moment. Everyone except me, Sophia Grant. At first, I thought it was an oversight. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail, or perhaps Vanessa assumed Mom had told me. But as I kept scrolling, the truth crystallized with each passing photo. The engagement party I'd never heard about. The bridal shower where my cousins posed with mimosas. The rehearsal dinner announcement for family and close friends only. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. My phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed across the screen, and my heart jumped. Maybe this was her calling to explain, to apologize, to invite me at the last minute. I answered on the second ring. "Sophia, honey," her voice was tight, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this conversation. "I saw you liked Vanessa's post." "I did," I said carefully. "It's beautiful. When's the ceremony?" Silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sound of her television in the background. When she finally spoke, her tone carried that familiar edge of maternal authority mixed with guilt. "It's this Saturday. At the Cypress Point Resort." Another pause. "Sweetheart, I need you to understand, Vanessa wanted to keep things small. Intimate. You know how she gets when she's stressed." The words hit like ice water. "So I'm not invited to my own sister's wedding?" "It's not that simple." Mom's voice softened into that practiced sympathy she used when delivering bad news. "You two have had your complications. Vanessa just wanted her day to be peaceful. Drama-free. Drama-free." As if my very existence was chaos incarnate. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the black case. "What complications, Mom? When have I ever caused drama at a family event?" "You know what I mean," she said, and I could hear her moving around, probably tidying something that didn't need tidying. "You and Vanessa have different energies. She's sensitive right now. Planning a wedding is stressful enough without." "Without what?" "Without her sister being there." "Sophia, please don't make this harder than it has to be. She's nervous enough as it is." I closed my eyes, trying to process what I was hearing. In our family, Vanessa had always been the golden child, the one with the infectious laugh, the one who could charm anyone, the one who somehow made every room brighter just by walking into it. I was the older sister, the responsible one, the one who cleaned up messes and asked for nothing in return. When Vanessa dropped out of college, I helped her find a job. When she couldn't make rent, I quietly sent money. When she got arrested for a DUI 3 years ago, I was the one who picked her up from jail at 3 a.m. while Mom and Dad were too upset to deal with it. And now, for the most important day of her life, I wasn't even worth a seat at the back row. "I have to go," I said quietly. "Sophia, wait." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark phone screen. Tired eyes, tight mouth, the face of someone who'd spent 32 years being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who never stirred things up. That evening, I sat in my small apartment in downtown Sacramento, rain pattering against the windows like an accusation. The city lights blurred through the water droplets, each one pulsing like a distant star I'd never reach. I'd made myself a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, my laptop open to Vanessa's Instagram page. Photo after photo told the story of a life I wasn't part of. Vanessa and Marcus at wine tastings, hiking in Big Sur, celebrating anniversaries at restaurants I'd never been invited to. Their relationship timeline played out in carefully curated squares, each image more perfect than the last. Marcus always looked impeccable, designer clothes, perfect smile, his arm possessively wrapped around Vanessa's waist in every shot. Something about those photos made me pause. In every single one, Vanessa was turned toward Marcus, her body language deferential, almost small. It was subtle, but I'd studied enough photography in college to notice composition. She never stood in front of him, never took center stage, even in photos that were supposedly about her. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Zara. Just saw V's wedding posts. Please tell me you're the maid of honor and just keeping it low-key. I typed back, nope. Not even invited. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, what the actual hell? That's insane. Welcome to the Grant family dynamics, I replied. Want me to come over? I've got wine and murder podcasts. I almost said yes, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the strange numbness that had settled over me since Mom's call. Thanks, but I think I need to process this alone. As the night wore on, I found myself scrolling deeper into Marcus's social media presence. His Facebook showed the same polished perfection, expensive vacations, business achievements, the kind of life that looked flawless from the outside. But there was something in the comments that caught my attention. His ex-girlfriend had liked several of his older posts, and when I clicked her profile, I found myself staring at a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. Her name was Jessica Torres, and her most recent post was a selfie with a caption that made my blood run cold, 2 years free from toxicity. Still healing, but grateful for my strength. To anyone out there in a similar situation, you're not alone. You're worthy of love that doesn't hurt. #SurvivorStrong #domestic violence awareness. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Marcus's ex was a domestic violence survivor. And in 3 days, my sister was going to marry him. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like a warning I was only beginning to understand. The next morning arrived gray and restless, matching the churning in my stomach. I'd barely slept, Jessica Torres's words echoing in my mind like a warning bell I couldn't silence. You're worthy of love that doesn't hurt. The phrase felt heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and spent the morning diving deeper into research I wished I didn't need to conduct. Jessica's Instagram revealed a timeline that made my chest tight. Photos from 3 years ago showed her vibrant and glowing, often with Marcus. Then a gradual shift, fewer pictures, forced smiles, sunglasses worn indoors. The final post with Marcus was from 18 months ago, a couple's photo where Jessica looked almost translucent, her smile brittle as glass. After that, radio silence for 6 months. When she returned to social media, it was with posts about therapy, self-care, and rebuilding. Never explicitly naming Marcus, but the timeline aligned perfectly with their breakup. I screenshot everything, my hands trembling slightly. Part of me felt like a stalker, but a larger part felt like a detective uncovering something crucial. I thought about calling Vanessa directly, but we hadn't spoken in 3 months, not since the incident with Mom's birthday dinner when I'd questioned why Marcus always answered for Vanessa when people asked her direct questions. He's just protective, Vanessa had said, but her voice carried a note I'd never heard before. Defensive, but also scared. Around noon, my phone rang. Zara's name appeared, and I answered gratefully. Okay, I've been thinking about this all night, she said without preamble. This whole wedding exclusion thing is beyond messed up. But I also saw your Instagram activity at 2 a.m., and you were deep diving someone's profile. Spill. I told her about Jessica, about the domestic violence posts, about the timeline that painted a picture I desperately didn't want to see. Zara listened in silence, which was unusual for her. Sophia, she said finally, you need to tell someone. Tell them what? That Marcus's ex posted about being a survivor? That could mean anything. Maybe it wasn't even about him. Don't. Zara's voice was sharp. Don't do that thing where you minimize your instincts. You've always had a sixth sense about people. Remember Tyler from college? You called his behavior months before. This is different. This is my sister. Exactly. This is your sister, which means you have to try. After we hung up, I found myself pacing my small living room like a caged animal. The photos from Vanessa's engagement party were still open on my laptop, and I studied them with new eyes. In one image, Marcus's hand rested on Vanessa's shoulder, but his grip looked tight, possessive. In another, Vanessa was mid-laugh, but there was something forced about it, like she was performing happiness rather than feeling it. I was overthinking. I had to be. But then I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years ago, the last family gathering I'd attended. Marcus had made a joke about Vanessa's cooking, something about how she tried her best, but he usually had to fix her mistakes. Everyone laughed, including Vanessa, but I caught the way her face fell for just a split second before she pasted the smile back on. At the time, I'd written it off as typical couple teasing. Now, it felt like a red flag I'd been too polite to acknowledge. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Vanessa had posted a new story, a boomerang of her getting her nails done, her engagement ring catching the salon lights. The caption read, "Last manicure as a single lady." Marcus picked the color, he has such good taste. Nail polish sparkles. Marcus picked the color. For her own nails. For her own wedding. I screenshot that too, adding it to a folder I'd started labeling, concerns. The folder was growing disturbingly thick. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house in Roseville, making the excuse that I needed to pick up some old books from my childhood bedroom. Mom greeted me with surprise and barely concealed guilt. "Sophia. What brings you by?" "Just getting some things," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "How are the wedding preparations going?" Her face brightened artificially. "Oh, wonderful. Vanessa's so excited. Marcus has been such a help with all the planning. He's very involved." "Involved how?" "Well, he had opinions about the flowers, the seating arrangements, even the music. Most grooms don't care about those details, but Marcus wants everything perfect for Vanessa." She paused, stirring something on the stove. "Between you and me, I think she's lucky to have someone who cares so much about her happiness. Or someone who needs to control every detail," I thought but didn't say. "Have you met any of his friends? His family?" Mom's stirring slowed. "Well, his parents live back east. Very busy people, couldn't make it for the engagement party. And his friends. Marcus is quite selective about his social circle. Quality over quantity, you know. Isolated from his support system." Another red flag. "What about his ex-girlfriends? Has Vanessa mentioned any of them?" "Sophia." Mom turned to face me, her expression sharp. "That's hardly appropriate to ask about. The past is the past." But her reaction told me everything. She'd thought about it too. I spent the rest of the visit making small talk while my mind raced. When I finally left, I had more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear: the perfect facade everyone was so eager to protect might be hiding something dark. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my college roommate Maya, who now worked as a social worker specializing in domestic violence cases. Hypothetically, I said after we'd caught up, "What would you look for if you suspected someone you cared about was in an abusive relationship?" Maya's voice immediately became professional. "Isolation from family and friends is a big one. The abuser gradually cuts off the victim's support system. Control over decisions, both big and small. Financial control. And often, the relationship moves very quickly: engagement, marriage, big commitments before the victim has time to really see the pattern." My blood chilled. Marcus and Vanessa had been dating for 14 months. They'd gotten engaged after 10 months and were marrying after barely more than a year together. The thing is, Maya continued, from the outside, it often looks like devotion. The abuser presents as the perfect partner, attentive, romantic, protective. It's only behind closed doors that the control becomes threatening. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, city lights painting shadows across my walls. I thought about all the family gatherings Vanessa had missed in the past year, all explained away as, Marcus had work things, or, they had other plans. I thought about how she'd stopped calling me, stopped texting, stopped being the sister who used to send me random memes at 2 a.m. I thought about how she'd become smaller, quieter, more careful. And I thought about how, in 48 hours, she was going to marry a man whose ex-girlfriend was a domestic violence survivor. The rain started again, gentle at first, then harder. I opened my laptop and began typing an email I wasn't sure I'd ever send. Dear Vanessa, I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I'm worried about you. I've been thinking about some things, and I need you to know that if you ever need help, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. No questions asked. No judgment. Just love. Always, Sophia. I stared at the draft for an hour before closing the laptop without sending it. Outside, the storm was building, and I had the distinct feeling that by this time tomorrow, everything would be different. Whether I acted or not. The morning of Vanessa's wedding dawned crisp and cloudless, the kind of perfect California day that belonged in magazines. I woke with a knot in my stomach that had been tightening for weeks, made worse by the fact that I'd be spending this day alone while my entire family celebrated without me. I'd made peace with not attending, or at least, I'd told myself I had. But as I scrolled through the early morning posts from relatives already arriving at Cypress Point Resort, the exclusion felt fresh and sharp all over again. My cousin Riley had posted a video of the ocean view from her hotel room. Can't wait for the most beautiful wedding ever. Hashtag Vanessa and Marcus hashtag Cypress Point. The comments were already flowing, family members I hadn't seen in years, all gathered for an event I wasn't deemed worthy to witness. I closed Instagram and tried to focus on work emails, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, I found myself checking social media again, like picking at a scab I couldn't leave alone. Around 2 p.m., the posts began in earnest. Photos of the ceremony setup, white roses cascading over clifftop arches, chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the Pacific, golden light streaming through cypress trees. It looked like something from a fairy tale, exactly the kind of wedding Vanessa had dreamed about since we were little girls playing dress-up in Mom's old curtains. Then came the getting ready photos. Vanessa in her suite, surrounded by bridesmaids I barely recognized, college friends, co-workers, women who'd apparently earned places in her inner circle that I'd been excluded from. She looked radiant in the photos, her smile bright and perfect, but I found myself studying her eyes. Even in the carefully filtered images, something seemed dimmed. At 4:30, the ceremony post started. Someone was live-streaming snippets on Instagram stories, a violation of most wedding etiquette, but typical for our family's need to document everything. I watched Vanessa walk down the aisle on Dad's arm, her dress flowing behind her like water. She looked beautiful, ethereal almost, but there was something rigid about her posture, something rehearsed about her smile. Marcus stood waiting at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his expression intense as he watched her approach. Even through the grainy phone video, there was something possessive about his gaze, like he was claiming rather than greeting her. I closed the app and poured myself a glass of wine, even though it was barely 5 p.m. Outside my apartment window, Sacramento hummed with normal weekend life, people walking dogs, children playing in the courtyard, couples heading out for dinner dates. The ordinary world continuing while my family celebrated a union I was increasingly convinced was a mistake. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. An unknown number with a 831 area code, Monterey. My heart jumped. Maybe it was Vanessa, calling from someone else's phone, maybe having second thoughts, maybe. Hello? I answered quickly. Sophia Grant? The voice was male, unfamiliar, slightly breathless. Yes, This is Detective James Rodriguez with the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling about an incident at the Cypress Point Resort involving your sister, Vanessa Grant. The world tilted. What kind of incident? Ma'am, there was an altercation at a wedding reception this evening. Your sister was involved, and we need to speak with you as next of kin. Is she hurt? What happened? She's been taken to Community Hospital of the Monterey Peninsula for evaluation. She's conscious and stable, but... He paused. Ma'am, are you able to come to Monterey tonight? I was already reaching for my keys. I'm leaving right now. Can you tell me what happened? We'll discuss the details when you arrive. The hospital is... I know where it is, I interrupted, my mind racing. Detective Rodriguez, was my sister hurt by someone else? Another pause. Ma'am, I think it's best if we talk in person. The drive to Monterey normally took 2 hours. I made it in 90 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I'd called Mom and Dad repeatedly, but both phones went straight to voicemail. Either they were still celebrating, or they were already at the hospital and too overwhelmed to answer. The emergency room at Community Hospital was surprisingly quiet for a Saturday night. I approached the reception desk, my heart hammering. I'm looking for Vanessa Grant. Vanessa Grant. I'm her sister. The nurse looked up sympathetically. She's in room 12. The detective is waiting to speak with you first, though. Detective Rodriguez turned out to be a kind-faced man in his 40s with tired eyes that had clearly seen too much. He guided me to a small consultation room and closed the door. Your sister is going to be okay, he began, which should have been reassuring but somehow made everything worse. She has some bruising, a split lip, and we're monitoring her for a possible concussion. Someone hit her? Ms. Grant, what I'm about to tell you might be difficult to hear. At approximately 8:15 this evening, during the wedding reception, several guests witnessed your sister's new husband grab her forcefully by the arm and strike her across the face when she attempted to speak to another guest. The room seemed to spin. Marcus hit her? At their wedding reception? Multiple witnesses saw the assault. When other guests intervened, Mr. Chin became increasingly agitated. He was arrested for domestic violence and assault. He's currently being held pending arraignment. I stared at him, trying to process the words. But, there were hundreds of people there. Family, friends. How could he? Alcohol was involved, which likely lowered his inhibitions. From what witnesses described, he'd been increasingly controlling throughout the evening, monitoring who your sister spoke to, interrupting her conversations, keeping her close to his side. The actual assault occurred when she tried to go speak with an elderly relative alone. My blood went cold. This wasn't the first time. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. What makes you say that? I told him about Jessica Torres, about the timeline, about all the small signs I'd noticed and dismissed. He took notes, nodding occasionally. We've actually been in contact with Ms. Torres, he said quietly. She reached out to us after seeing wedding photos on social media. She's willing to testify about her own experiences if this goes to trial. How is my sister handling all this? She's struggling. The assault was witnessed by her entire family, filmed by multiple guests. The videos are already circulating on social media. She's dealing with physical trauma, emotional trauma, and very public humiliation all at once. My heart broke for her. Whatever our family drama, whatever hurt feelings existed between us, none of that mattered now. My sister needed me. Can I see her? Of course. But Ms. Grant, she's going to need a lot of support. Leaving an abusive relationship is complicated, especially when it's this public. The shame, the embarrassment, the fear of judgment, it all makes victims want to isolate themselves. I stood, my legs unsteady. She won't have to do this alone. Room 12 was dimly lit, machines beeping softly in the background. Vanessa lay propped up against pillows, her left eye swollen shut, her lips split and purple. When she saw me, her remaining eye filled with tears. Sophia, she whispered. You came. I moved to her bedside, careful not to jostle her. Of course I came. I'm so sorry, V. I'm so sorry. You tried to warn me, didn't you? Her voice was barely audible. All those questions about Marcus, about his ex-girlfriend. You knew something was wrong. I suspected, but I should have done more. I should have. No. She gripped my hand weakly. I wouldn't have listened. I was so angry at everyone, so determined to prove that someone could love me the way I wanted to be loved. I ignored every red flag because admitting the truth would have meant admitting I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Tears rolled down my cheeks. None of this is your fault. The whole wedding, she whispered. Everyone saw. Mom, Dad, all our cousins. It's all over social media. People are calling me stupid, saying they saw it coming, making jokes about the bride who got punched on her wedding day. My chest burned with rage, not at Vanessa, but at every person who would rather mock a victim than offer support. Let them talk, I said fiercely. You survived. You got out before it got worse. That makes you brave, not stupid. She squeezed my hand. I don't know how to come back from this. How do I face everyone? How do I rebuild my life when everyone knows what happened? One day at a time, I said. And you won't do it alone. I promise. Outside her room, I could hear voices in the hallway, Mom and Dad arriving, their footsteps quick and anxious. Whatever family dysfunction had led to my exclusion from the wedding seemed impossibly small now, dwarfed by the enormity of what Vanessa was facing. The viral videos Detective Rodriguez mentioned would soon be everywhere, turning my sister's worst moment into entertainment for strangers. But for now, in this quiet hospital room, she was safe. The truth was finally out, ugly and public and undeniable. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something better. The morning after the hospital visit, I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. The videos from Vanessa's wedding had exploded across social media overnight. #Monterey Wedding Assault was trending on Twitter, with thousands of shares, comments, and reactions. The footage was grainy but clear enough, Marcus grabbing Vanessa's arm, her stumbling backward, his hand connecting with her face as gasps echoed from the crowd. I turned off my phone and drove straight back to Monterey. Vanessa was being discharged that morning, and someone needed to help her navigate what came next. When I arrived at the hospital, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her torn wedding dress from the night before, staring blankly at the wall. The nurses showed me, she said without looking up. The videos. Millions of people have seen it now. I sat beside her carefully. How are you feeling? Like I want to disappear. Her voice was hollow. Do you know what the comments are saying? Half of them are calling Marcus a monster, which he is. But the other half are saying I must have done something to deserve it, or that I should have known better, or that this is what happens when you marry someone you barely know. Those people don't matter. Don't they? She finally looked at me, her unswollen eye red from crying. Because it feels like the whole world is watching me, judging every decision I made. And maybe they're right. Maybe I was stupid and naive and... Stop. I took her hands gently. You were manipulated by someone who was very good at manipulation. That's what abusers do, they make you feel like you're choosing them when really, they're choosing for you. The discharge process took hours. Detective Rodriguez met us at the hospital to discuss the case. Marcus had been denied bail due to the violent nature of the assault and the risk of retaliation. The district attorney was pressing charges for domestic violence, assault, and battery. With the video evidence and multiple witnesses, conviction seemed certain. We'll also need to discuss the prior incidents, Detective Rodriguez said gently to Vanessa. Jessica Torres has provided a detailed statement about her relationship with Mr. Chin. If you're comfortable sharing your own experiences, it would strengthen the case significantly. Vanessa nodded slowly. There were things. Small things at first. He didn't like my friends, said they were bad influences. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was texting. He controlled our finances, said I was bad with money. And sometimes, when he got angry. She touched her throat unconsciously. He never hit me before last night, but he would grab me, shake me, pin me against walls when he thought I wasn't listening. I felt sick listening to her describe months of escalating abuse that our entire family had missed, or chosen not to see. Over the next few days, I helped Vanessa move out of the apartment she'd shared with Marcus. The landlord was surprisingly understanding, allowing her to break the lease given the circumstances. We packed her belongings while Marcus remained in jail, the silence in the apartment heavy with the ghosts of their relationship. In their bedroom, I found a journal Vanessa had kept. She caught me looking at it and nodded for me to read. The entries painted a devastating picture of gradual isolation and control. March 15th, Marcus says I laugh too loud when we're out. He's probably right, I should be more aware of how I come across. April 2nd, cancelled lunch with Sophia again. Marcus had planned a surprise date, and he gets so disappointed when I have other commitments. May 10th, got upset about the credit card thing, but Marcus explained that he's just better with financial planning. It makes sense to let him handle it. June 18th, Marcus thinks I should skip Riley's graduation party. He says family events make me anxious, and he's not wrong. I do get overwhelmed. Each entry showed Vanessa slowly convincing herself that Marcus's control was care, his isolation tactics were protection, his criticism was guidance. Reading it was like watching someone disappear in slow motion. The media attention was relentless. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the wedding day assault and a fairy tale turned nightmare. Vanessa's photo was everywhere, both the beautiful bridal shots from earlier in the day and the devastating images of her bruised face afterward. Reporters called constantly, wanting interviews, wanting her story. I fielded most of the calls, becoming her unofficial spokesperson and protector. The attention was overwhelming and invasive, but it also brought unexpected support. Domestic violence organizations reached out offering resources. Survivors shared their stories in solidarity. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reported a spike in calls after the videos went viral. At least something good is coming from this, Vanessa said one afternoon as we read through supportive messages on a Facebook page someone had created for her. Other women are getting help because they saw what happened to me. But the positive response was mixed with cruelty. Online trolls dissected every aspect of Vanessa's relationship, her appearance, her choices. Some blamed her for not seeing the signs, others mocked her for choosing the wrong man. The victim blaming was vicious and constant. One particularly brutal article appeared in a gossip blog, titled, "Red Flags the Monterey Bride Should Have Seen." It listed Marcus's controlling behaviors as if they were obvious warning signs that any intelligent woman should have recognized. The comments were worse, hundreds of people declaring they would never be that stupid, or that Vanessa got what she deserved. I found Vanessa reading it in her temporary apartment, tears streaming down her face. "They're right though, aren't they?" she whispered. "I did miss obvious signs. I let him isolate me from you, from everyone who cared about me. I made excuses for behavior that I should have recognized as abuse. Recognizing abuse from the outside is completely different from recognizing it when you're inside it," I said firmly. "These people commenting have the luxury of hindsight and distance. You were living it day by day, with someone who was systematically breaking down your ability to trust your own judgment." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Marcus's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was adamant about going to trial. The video evidence was too clear, the public attention too intense, the message too important. This would be a case that sent a signal about consequences for domestic violence. Jessica Torres flew in from Denver to give her deposition. Meeting her was surreal. She looked so much like Vanessa, the same delicate features, the same quiet strength that Marcus had apparently been drawn to and then tried to destroy. "The patterns are identical," Jessica told us over coffee. "The isolation, the financial control, the way he made us feel like we were choosing him when really, he was systematically removing our other choices. The only difference is that your assault happened in public, so he couldn't hide it or make you doubt it happened." "How did you finally leave?" Vanessa asked. A friend staged an intervention. She'd been documenting the changes in my behavior, taking screenshots of my social media posts, keeping track of how I was becoming smaller and more careful. When she showed me the evidence, I couldn't deny what was happening anymore. I thought about my own failed attempts to reach Vanessa, my subtle questions and gentle concerns that she'd brushed off. Maybe I should have been more direct, more forceful. Maybe I should have staged my own intervention. The guilt doesn't help, Jessica said, as if reading my thoughts. I spent years wondering if I could have saved myself sooner, if I could have seen the signs earlier. But that's trauma thinking. The only person responsible for abuse is the abuser. 2 weeks after the wedding, Marcus was formally charged with multiple felonies. His mugshot appeared on news websites, a stark contrast to the polished social media photos that had fooled so many people. The trial was scheduled for the following spring, giving Vanessa months to heal and prepare for what would undoubtedly be an intense and public legal battle. I want to testify, she told me one evening as we sat in her new apartment, a small one-bedroom place with good security and no shared walls with neighbors. I want to tell the whole truth, not just about that night, but about everything that led up to it. Are you sure? The defense will try to tear you apart, blame you, make it seem like you provoked him. Let them try, she said, and for the first time since the hospital, I heard steel in her voice. I'm done being ashamed. I'm done hiding. If my story can help one other woman recognize what I didn't, then it's worth facing whatever they throw at me. The woman sitting across from me was different from the bride who'd posed for perfect photos 2 weeks ago. This Vanessa was scarred but stronger, wounded but wiser. The fairy tale was over, but something more real was beginning to take its place. Outside her window, Monterey Bay stretched toward the horizon, endless and full of possibilities. The same view that had witnessed her worst moment would now watch her rebuild her life, one honest day at a time. 3 years later, I stood in the back of a packed auditorium at UC Santa Barbara, watching my sister address an audience of college students about domestic violence awareness. The transformation was remarkable, not just in how she looked, though the confidence in her posture and the strength in her voice were unmistakable, but in how she carried herself through the world. The hardest part wasn't the physical abuse, Vanessa was saying, her voice clear and steady through the microphone. It was realizing how completely I had lost myself. I had become so focused on managing his moods, anticipating his needs, avoiding his anger, that I forgot I was a person with my own thoughts, feelings, and desires. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. These weren't just statistics to them, this was a real person who had survived something many of them might be experiencing themselves. After Marcus's trial, where he was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 6 years in prison, Vanessa had thrown herself into advocacy work. She started small, volunteering at the local domestic violence shelter, sharing her story in support groups. But as the viral videos continued to circulate and her story reached more people, she began speaking at larger venues. I want to address something that many of you might be thinking, she continued. You might be wondering how someone could miss such obvious signs, how someone could be stupid enough to marry an abuser. I know because I used to think the same thing before it happened to me. She clicked to the next slide, a photo of herself and Marcus from early in their relationship, both beaming at the camera during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Look at this picture. Do you see any signs of abuse? Because I don't. What you're seeing is the honeymoon phase, when abusers are at their most charming, most attentive, most convincing. Marcus wasn't a monster who emerged from the shadows, he was a man who made me feel more loved and special than I'd ever felt in my life. I remembered that weekend. Vanessa had called me afterward, gushing about how perfect Marcus was, how he'd planned every detail of the trip, how he'd told her she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. At the time, it had seemed romantic. Now I understood it as the beginning of a calculated campaign of control. The isolation happened so gradually that I didn't notice it. First, he expressed concern about friends he thought were negative influences. Then he suggested I was spending too much time with family when I should be focusing on our relationship. Each request seemed reasonable, even caring. He wasn't ordering me to cut people off, he was just expressing preferences, worries, suggestions. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. How do you tell the difference between someone being caring and someone being controlling? Vanessa smiled sadly. Caring expands your world. Control shrinks it. Someone who truly cares about you wants you to have strong relationships with family and friends, wants you to pursue your interests and goals, wants you to feel confident in your own decisions. Control disguised as care makes you smaller, more dependent, more isolated. After the presentation, during the Q&A session, a student asked the question I'd been dreading: do you regret not listening to your family's concerns earlier? Vanessa glanced back at me in the audience before answering. My family's concerns were subtle, and frankly, I wasn't ready to hear them. My sister Sophia, she gestured toward me, had instincts that something was wrong, but I was so defensive about my relationship that I interpreted her questions as attacks on my judgment. She paused, choosing her words carefully. One of the cruelest aspects of abuse is how it turns the victim against their own support system. I was convinced that my family just didn't understand our love, that they were jealous or controlling themselves. The abuser's voice becomes the loudest voice in your head, drowning out everyone else. After the event, we drove back to her apartment in silence for a while. Vanessa had moved to Santa Barbara 6 months after the trial, wanting a fresh start somewhere without the weight of local notoriety. She'd started a master's program in social work, specializing in trauma counseling. That was your best presentation yet, I finally said. It gets easier every time, she replied. But also harder, in some ways. The more I understand about the psychology of abuse, the more I realize how expertly I was manipulated. It's validating and infuriating at the same time. Her apartment was small but bright, filled with plants and books and artwork from local artists. It felt like Vanessa, the real Vanessa, not the carefully curated version Marcus had shaped her into. Photos covered the refrigerator, her with new friends from school, at hiking trails, at volunteer events. A life rebuilt from scratch, authentic and chosen rather than imposed. I got an email from Jessica Torres yesterday, Vanessa said, putting on water for tea. She's getting married again. She wanted to thank me for speaking publicly about Marcus, said it helped her process her own experience. That's wonderful. She also said something interesting. She said watching the videos of my wedding was like seeing her own story from the outside, understanding for the first time that what happened to her really was abuse and really wasn't her fault. We sat at her small kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, a different view of the same body of water that had witnessed her worst moment 3 years ago. Do you ever regret the way everything played out? I asked. The public nature of it, the viral videos, all the attention? Vanessa considered this carefully. I hate that my worst moment is preserved forever on the internet. I hate that strangers feel entitled to judge my choices and my intelligence. But I can't regret the outcome. If my humiliation saves even one person from going through what I went through, then it was worth it. She pulled out her phone and showed me a message from that morning. Hi Vanessa, I saw your presentation at my university last year. I want you to know that your story helped me recognize patterns in my own relationship. I left 3 months ago and I'm safe now. Thank you for being brave enough to share your truth. I get messages like this every week, she said. Sometimes they're from young women in college who are just starting to recognize red flags. Sometimes they're from older women who have been trapped for decades. The common thread is that seeing someone else's story helped them understand their own. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, we talked about the family dynamics that had led to my exclusion from her wedding. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. If I had been there that night, I might have tried to minimize the incident, to protect family privacy, to help cover up what happened. My absence, painful as it was, had inadvertently ensured that the truth couldn't be hidden. I owe you an apology, Vanessa said suddenly. Not just for the wedding invitation, but for shutting you out for months before that. You were trying to look out for me, and I punished you for it. You were being controlled by someone whose survival depended on isolating you from people who might see through him, I replied. You don't owe me an apology for being manipulated. Maybe not, but I owe you gratitude. You came to the hospital that night even though I had treated you terribly. You helped me rebuild my life even though I had excluded you from the biggest day of mine. You never said, "I told you so," never made me feel more ashamed than I already felt. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's what sisters do. Not all sisters, she said quietly. I'm lucky to have you. As I prepared to drive back to Sacramento that evening, Vanessa handed me a copy of her master's thesis, which she'd defend next month. The title read, From Silence to Voice: How Public Exposure of Domestic Violence Can Facilitate Healing and Prevention. You're the first person outside my advisor to read this, she said. I write about our family, about the exclusion from the wedding, about how sometimes the most painful experiences create the most important opportunities. Driving north on Highway 101, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us here. 3 years ago, I had been the forgotten sister, excluded from a fairy tale wedding that turned into a nightmare. Tonight, I was driving home from watching Vanessa transform her trauma into triumph, her pain into purpose, her worst moment into a platform for helping others. The viral videos that had once been symbols of humiliation had become tools of education. The wedding that had excluded me had ultimately brought us closer than we'd ever been. The relationship that had nearly destroyed my sister had revealed a strength she never knew she possessed. As the city lights of Sacramento came into view, I smiled at the thought of Vanessa's upcoming thesis defense, her plans to open a counseling practice, her new relationship with a kind social worker who encouraged her independence rather than demanding her submission. The fairy tale ending she'd thought she was getting 3 years ago had been a lie. But the life she was building now, honest, chosen, authentic, was better than any fairy tale. It was real, and it was hers, and no one could take it away from her again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting back at the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's building something so beautiful from the wreckage that you realize they actually did you a favor by showing you who they really were. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.